The sun slowly ascended on the horizon, painting the sky in golden and pink hues, casting a soft glow over the grand estate where, in just a few hours, one of the most anticipated weddings of the year would take place. Fresh, fragrant rose petals rested on the carpeted garden pathways, ready to welcome the bride's steps. In the distance, the bird song blended with the gentle murmur of the morning breeze, but amidst the beauty and harmony of dawn, there was something else, something intangible, something that didn't quite fit. Not a subscriber yet? Join our community by clicking subscribe and turn on the notification bell to receive a notification every time we upload a new video. Inside the grand mansion, the atmosphere buzzed with the frenzy of last-minute preparations. Florists dressed in pastel tones worked with meticulous precision, intertwining white roses and lavender into the arch where the couple would exchange vows. Waiters in impeccable black uniforms polished crystal glasses, aligning them over linen-covered tables that gleamed under the soft glow of the chandeliers. Everything was perfect, or at least it was supposed to be. At the center of it all was Alexis Brooks. At 39 years old, she had become a woman who radiated confidence and control. Dressed in an elegant white silk robe, her slender figure exuded an unshakable poise. Her radiant skin and neatly styled curls, gathered in a pristine bun, reflected the diligence and effort behind every one of her successes. The diamond earrings, dangling from her ears, a gift from her late mother, sparkled with each subtle movement of her head. Yet beneath that image of perfection, an invisible thread of tension ran through her body from head to toe. With a restrained sigh, she reviewed the task list for what felt like the 100th time, her manicured finger meticulously tracing each line. Cake, delivered, guests, arriving, music, confirmed, photographer, present, everything was going according to plan. And yet, her stomach twisted with a feeling that wasn't listed anywhere. "Mom." The child's voice made her stop immediately. She turned toward the door, and there stood Tia, her 7-year-old daughter, dressed in a delicate lavender dress that floated with each step she took. Her dark hair had been gathered into small braids adorned with tiny white flowers, a vision of innocence and grace, but her face was tense, her lips pressed into a firm line, and her large dark eyes, so much like her mother's, held something unusual. Concern. Alexis frowned and stepped toward her daughter, gently brushing a hand over her cheek. "You look beautiful, my love." But Tia didn't smile. She simply tilted her head slightly, her expression solemn beyond her years. "Mom, are you happy?" The question hit like an unexpected blow. Alexis blinked, caught off guard by the weight of those words. "Of course, sweetheart. Today is a very special day." Tia didn't look away. She didn't seem convinced. "I don't like him." The statement fell like a stone into a still lake. Alexis felt something inside her tighten. "Tia." Her voice was measured, deliberate, almost a whisper. "I know it's hard to accept change, but David is a good man. He loves me, and I love him. You'll see." Tia's eyes flickered with something deeper than simple childish doubt. "He's not good. He's pretending." A shiver ran down Alexis's spine. The air in the room seemed to thicken. Tia had always been an observant child, too perceptive for her age. She could tell when someone was lying, when something wasn't right. But this wasn't just childish reluctance. "You're just nervous, my love, but I promise everything will be okay." Tia lowered her gaze, her small hands gripping the hem of her dress. "I hope you're right, Mom." And with that, she walked away in silence. Alexis watched her disappear through the door, the echo of her footsteps reverberating in her chest like a forewarning. The feeling returned, that tightness in her stomach. Something wasn't right, but she couldn't afford doubt. Not now, not today. She took a deep breath and straightened her posture, forcing herself to step back into her role. Today, she was getting married. Today had to be perfect. Tia walked slowly through the halls of the grand mansion, her tiny patent leather shoes barely making a sound against the marble floor. The lavender dress her mother had so carefully chosen for her felt heavy, uncomfortable. It wasn't the fabric nor the soft lace brushing against her legs. It was the feeling in her chest, the knot of anxiety growing with every passing minute. Click, subscribe, and turn on notifications. That way you'll always stay updated with our latest videos and never miss a thing. From her bedroom window, she watched the garden where the guests were starting to gather, chatting and laughing with champagne. Glasses in hand, adults always seemed happy at moments like these. They smiled with their lips, but their eyes rarely said the same. But she wasn't looking for the guests, she was looking for him. And there was David Clark, tall, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, with that perfect smile everyone adored. From a distance, his relaxed posture by the fountain gave him an air of confidence, of authority. One hand held his phone to his ear, while the other idly traced patterns on the water's surface. To everyone else, he was just an attractive man caught in an important conversation. But Tia didn't look at him the way everyone else did. She saw beyond the mask. Children didn't always have the words to explain what they felt, but their instincts were sharp, pure. And in that moment, every fiber of her being told her the same thing. Something was wrong. David spoke in a low, measured tone, but his jaw was tight. His smile never reached his eyes, and then, suddenly, he turned his head in her direction. For an instant, time seemed to freeze. From across the garden, their eyes met. It lasted only a second, but in that second, David's smile vanished. The charming man, the soon-to-be husband of her mother, was gone. In his place, there was something else, something cold, something calculating. It wasn't anger, nor annoyance. It was assessment, as if he were analyzing a chess piece, as if he were deciding what to do with her. Tia's mouth went dry, her small fingers gripped the window frame tightly, and then, just as quickly as it had disappeared, the smile returned. David raised a hand in a friendly gesture, a casual wave, as if nothing had happened, but Tia knew what she had seen. He was not a good man. It didn't matter how many times her mother said it. It didn't matter how many times he tried to prove otherwise. She knew, but no one would listen to her. Not yet. The day unfolded with the practiced elegance of a high society event. Impeccably dressed guests, champagne glasses clinking in toasts, laughter perfectly calibrated to blend into the fragrant evening air of the garden. Everything proceeded as it should, exactly as Alexis had planned, but Tia didn't feel like part of the celebration. From her quiet corner, hidden in the shadows of the hallways, she observed. Her mother moved gracefully among the guests, her silk gown hugging her figure as if it had been made just for her. But something was off. Tia noticed it in the way her shoulders tensed when David touched her, in the way her lips smiled, but her eyes never truly shone. Time passed, and the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of violet and amber. The night carried with it a heavier weight, a sense of unease that clung to Tia's skin like an invisible cloak. And that's when she heard it. Voices. Tia was on her way to her room when she stopped in front of David's study. The door, always closed, always off-limits, was slightly ajar. From inside, a low, tight murmur slipped through the gap. Tia's heart skipped a beat. She stepped closer, slipping off her shoes so she wouldn't make a sound. Her small fingers gently pushed against the wood, opening it just enough to see a sliver of the room inside. David was there. He wasn't smiling. His suit remained perfectly in place, but his posture had changed. He was no longer the charming man everyone adored. He was someone else entirely. With his phone pressed against his ear, his voice was cold, direct, devoid of any warmth. "She signs tomorrow. There won't be any complications. She doesn't suspect a thing." Tia felt the air in the room grow heavy. There was silence. Then David laughed. But it wasn't a happy laugh. It was dry, empty. Trust me, she's got everything mapped out in her head, her dream plan, her perfect wedding. She's so focused on the details that it won't even cross her mind to question what she's signing. A shiver crawled down Tia's spine. After that, it'll be easy. I'll leave her alone for a while and then make the necessary moves. By the time she realizes, it'll be too late. Her hands clenched against the doorframe. The kid, David's tone dropped. Tia held her breath. She's annoying, but it doesn't matter. She's just a child. No one listens to children. Fear exploded inside her like a bomb. David was using her mother. Not just that, he was going to deceive her and destroy her life, and no one could see it. Only her. Tia felt her heart hammering against her chest. She knew she had to get out of there, had to find her mother and tell her. But before she could move, David shifted slightly, his profile outlined against the glow of his desk lamp. And then he stopped. For a second, his eyes locked onto the sliver of darkness behind the door. Tia felt a chill spread through her entire body. Had he seen her? She didn't wait to find out. She took a silent step back, holding her breath, then slipped into the shadows of the hallway, running on tiptoe toward her room. She shut the door behind her, her heart pounding against her ribs. She leaned against the wood, trying to process what she had just heard. David wasn't just a liar. He was a predator. And if no one would listen to her, she would have to stop him herself. The clock was nearing midnight, yet Tia still couldn't breathe normally. Her chest rose and fell in short, uneven movements, and though she had locked herself in her room, the fear hadn't stayed outside. David was deceiving her mother. She had heard his voice, his words, the certainty with which he had planned everything. And the worst part was that if her mother signed that document after the wedding, there would be no turning back. She couldn't wait until morning. She couldn't let the sun rise with her mother still believing David was a good man. She had to do something. The mansion was nearly silent as Tia stepped out of her room. Only a few lights illuminated the hallways, save for the golden glow spilling in from the terrace, where Alexis was still with a few lingering guests, toasting one last drink before the big day. From a distance, Tia saw her. Her mother looked happy, or at least she did a good job pretending to be. Her white silk gown draped over her golden skin, like water beneath the soft lights, and her laughter floated in the air with ease. But Tia knew something inside her doubted. She had always known. She couldn't let her marry him. Taking a deep breath, she ran down the stairs. "Mom!" Alexis turned, startled to see her daughter there, barefoot, her lavender dress wrinkled, her expression filled with something she couldn't ignore. The guests fell silent. The air tensed immediately. "Tia, what are you doing awake at this hour?" Alexis asked with a patient tone, but there was already a faint tremor in her voice. Tia stopped in front of her, fists clenched at her sides. "I heard David." The silence grew even heavier. Alexis blinked. "What?" "I heard him on the phone in his office." Her mother's face hardened. Her posture shifted. David, standing a bit further back, lifted his head in a slow, calculated movement. Tia saw the way his jaw tightened. "Mom, he's lying to you." The words cut through the night like a blade, sharp and unforgiving. Some guests exchanged uneasy glances. Alexis felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "You don't know what you're saying, Tia." "Yes, I do," the girl shouted, her voice shaking. "He said that after the wedding you're going to sign something without realizing it. He said you trust him too much to suspect anything." A ringing noise filled Alexis's ears. "Tia, that's enough." "No, Mom," her voice cracked. "He said that after that, he would leave you alone for a while and then make his moves." "I heard him. He said it doesn't matter because no one listens to kids." The last sentence crashed over the terrace like a thunderclap. Now everyone was watching. Everyone. Alexis felt her body go numb. David, however, recovered quickly. "Sweetheart," he began, taking a step toward them. his usual smile in place, his false kindness dripping from every syllable. "I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding. Tia is a smart girl, but sometimes—" Tia flinched at the sound of his voice. She knew he was lying. She knew what he was, but the most important thing was that her mother knew it too. "Please, Mom," Tia sobbed, her voice shattered. "Don't marry him." Alexis felt her heart split in two because, for the first time, she looked at her daughter and saw something different. It wasn't a tantrum. It wasn't childish defiance. It was fear. David stood right beside her, his hand resting on her back, and suddenly that simple touch felt different. Her skin prickled. Something inside her began to crack, but she couldn't accept that truth here, not in front of everyone. The anger, the panic, the doubt, all mixed into her voice as she spoke. "That's enough, Tia. Go to your room." The silence was lethal. Tia felt her entire body tremble. She had tried, but her mother wouldn't listen. And then a different voice shattered the tension. "Alexis." It was Michael, her friend, the only one who had never trusted David, the only one who looked at David as if he already knew exactly what he was. He stepped forward slowly, his voice low, firm, unwavering. "Maybe you should listen to her." Alexis felt her stomach twist. Michael never spoke without thinking. Never. For the first time, David tensed. "What are you talking about, Michael?" His voice was no longer warm. Now it was sharp as steel. Michael didn't look away. "I'm saying that maybe it's time you tell us exactly what you were planning to do after the wedding." The crack had opened, and Alexis felt her entire world begin to crumble. The morning sun bathed the estate in its warm golden light, casting long shadows across the stone pathways. Everything was ready. The garden had been transformed into a dreamlike setting, rows of white chairs perfectly aligned, fresh flowers adorning every corner, and an altar draped in soft fabrics swaying gently with the light breeze. It was perfect. But Alexis didn't feel that way, dressed in her flawless wedding gown. White, silk and fine lace, she gazed at her reflection in the enormous mirror of her room. Her image was that of a radiant woman, the perfect bride, but her face didn't lie. Her hands were trembling. The echo of Tia's words still pounded in her head like a distant bell. "Don't marry him." She tried to ignore it. She tried to tell herself it was a misunderstanding. But something inside her resisted, a dark knot in her stomach tightening, twisting, pressing against her chest. A knock at the door made her jump. Alexis! It was Michael. Her old friend crossed the room with slow steps, watching her with those sharp eyes, filled with something that made her shiver. "You can still stop this." His voice held no judgment, just certainty. Alexis exhaled, turning away. "Don't start, Michael. Listen to me." Michael took another step forward. "You know something's wrong." She closed her eyes. She did. She always had. But if she accepted that truth now, what would she do next? She felt the tremor in her hands and forced them into fists. "I can't do this right now, Michael." Michael clenched his jaw. "No, Alexis." His voice dropped, heavy with meaning. "You can't do this at all." The silence between them was thick. She swallowed hard, turned back to the mirror, and forced her reflection to smile. "It's just nerves." Michael studied her for a long moment. Finally, he shook his head. "I hope you're right," and he walked out of the room. Alexis was left alone, staring at her reflection, staring at a woman about to ruin her own life. The murmurs of the guests faded as the music began to play. All heads turned toward the end of the petal-strewn aisle. There, Alexis appeared, majestic, beautiful, the perfect bride. But as she walked forward, her mind wasn't there. It was with Tia, with Michael, with the pressure in her chest. David stood waiting at the altar with his usual smile, rehearsed, perfect, warm, but she no longer saw warmth in his eyes. Each step felt heavier, and then, just as she was about to step onto the altar, "Stop!" A sharp cry cut through the music, through the murmurs, through the very air. Everyone turned, and there, in the middle of the aisle, was Tia. Her face flushed, fists clenched, eyes blazing with something fierce. "You can't get married!" The silence was absolute. Alexis felt her world blur. "What the hell?" David muttered under his breath. Tia's voice shattered the stillness again. "He's a liar. He's tricking my mum. He doesn't love her. He just wants her money." A chilling murmur rippled through the crowd. Eyes turned toward them like knives. David tensed. Alexis felt her heart stop. "Tia." She tried to speak, but her voice came out weak, broken. But her daughter wasn't done. "I heard him last night," Tia screamed, her voice raw. "He said he'd make you sign something after the wedding. He said you trust him too much to suspect anything. He said no one listens to kids." The last sentence landed like a brutal blow to Alexis's chest. She felt her knees weaken. The whispers among the guests became deafening. David clenched his jaw. He turned to Alexis. "Sweetheart, please," he began, his voice soft. Too soft, but it no longer sounded the same. And when he reached for her hand, Alexis pulled away. The ground beneath her seemed to collapse. She could no longer ignore it. She looked at David, really looked at him, and she saw what Tia had always seen. She saw the tension in his jaw, the desperation disguised beneath his calm tone, and she saw what was behind the mask. Her mouth parted. Her chest tightened, the air became heavier, and then a different voice rose above the silence. "Mr. Clark." A chill rippled through the garden. Alexis felt the cold seep into her skin. Among the crowd, two men in dark suits stepped forward with determined strides. One of them pulled out a badge. "Police." David froze completely. The murmurs of the guests turned into a storm of confusion and shock. The officers advanced toward the altar. One of them spoke, his voice firm and absolute. "David Clark, we need you to come with us for questioning." David's face twisted. The control he had held over Alexis for so long evaporated in seconds. He turned to her. His eyes no longer held warmth, only contained fury. Alexis felt a lump rise in her throat. She had been about to marry him. She had been about to give him everything. David clenched his teeth. "You're going to regret this, Alexis." His voice was low, cold, but she was no longer afraid. She straightened her back, and when she spoke, her voice did not waver. "No." Her lips barely moved. "You're the only one who's going to regret this." The officers snapped the handcuffs around his wrists. David tried to resist, but he had no power anymore, no control, and as they took him away, his shadow disappeared with him. Alexis closed her eyes. A small hand slipped into hers. Tia, her daughter, her salvation. She opened her eyes, tears brimming at the edges, and then she embraced her tightly, tightly like never before. She had been so close to losing everything, but thanks to Tia, thanks to her bravery, they were safe, together, and for the first time in a long time. The weight on her chest was gone. The wind drifted softly through the open windows, carrying the salty scent of the ocean and the distant murmur of waves crashing against the shore. It was a different sound, fresh, free. Alexis closed her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. The air here was light. 3 months had passed since the wedding day, since the day her life had almost changed forever, but not in the way she had expected. The case against David Clark had been bigger than she had imagined. The police had been investigating him for months. Financial fraud, contract manipulation, even suspected involvement in previous marriage scams. She had been his last victim, or at least she had almost been. The memory of Tia's voice still echoed in her mind. Don't marry him. Her daughter had seen it all from the beginning, and Alexis, despite all her success, her control, her intelligence, had been blind. She looked around. letting the warm sunlight filter through the sheer white curtains of their new home. There was no excessive luxury, no extravagant decorations, no grand chandeliers, just a place where she and her daughter could breathe. Tia stood on the terrace, her bare feet resting on the warm wooden planks. Her loose hair swayed with the ocean breeze as she sketched something in her notebook. Alexis leaned against the doorframe, watching in silence. She seemed different, calmer, more secure, but there were still traces of everything she had endured in her eyes, and that broke Alexis's heart. She walked over and sat beside her. "What are you drawing?" she asked gently. Tia lifted her gaze. Shadows still lingered in her eyes, but so did strength. She turned the notebook toward her. Alexis looked at the page. It was a drawing of the two of them, holding hands, safe. Her chest tightened. "It's beautiful." She ran a tender hand through Tia's hair. Tia didn't smile, but she leaned slightly into her mother, seeking her warmth. "Mom." Her voice was soft, but Alexis felt the weight behind it. "Tell me, my love." There was a pause before Tia finally asked, "Will you ever trust someone again?" The question hit hard. Alexis felt her throat tighten for a second. She had spent entire nights wondering the same thing. She looked out at the waves in the distance, the clear sky, the stillness of the afternoon. Then she looked at her daughter. Your daughter who had saved her life, her daughter who had shown the courage she hadn't. Alexis took Tia's small hand between hers. "Someday, yes." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "But this time, I'll do it with my eyes open." Tia studied her for a moment. Then she nodded. There were no more words. None were needed. They simply sat there, watching the ocean, letting the wind carry away the remnants of a past that no longer held power over them. And for the first time in a long time, Alexis felt something new. Peace. True, pure, unbreakable peace. If this story inspired you, leave a like to support the channel and subscribe for more content like this. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. And tell me, where are you watching from? We love hearing from every corner of the world where our channel reaches.